Hello guys, welcome to Azure DevOps sessions. What we will be doing is 8-week session on a weekly basis. What I will be doing is on a weekend, every Saturday and Sunday, one hour, I will take these sessions. And only today's session will be on the theory part will be more. Okay. Apart from that, going forward, all the session will be kind of a practical session. So this course is basically for a beginner. So meaning consider it as you're either non-IT or IT beginner into Azure DevOps. Okay, so you don't know about anything in the IT field itself. In that manner, I'll start it off these sessions. In today's agenda, it's basically, so we will try to cover overview of Azure DevOps, what exactly it is, history and evolution of Azure DevOps. So how exactly Azure DevOps over the period of time, how exactly it was been evolved. Okay, then thereafter we will go through the each and services and the feature which is currently available in the Azure DevOps. Okay, and what is the benefits of Azure DevOps over the any other CI/CD tool. For example, the popular one is Jenkins, right? So what exactly Azure DevOps differentiate between Jenkins and then Azure. Okay, that a kind of analogy we will do it. Okay, so apart from that, we will go through the pricing and plans, but okay, as a newbie, it gives us a free tier as well. Okay, so up to some extent you should be able to utilize it. You can build it upon by yourself. Okay, and you can test it out. So you need not pay a single rupee itself. Without paying money itself, you should be able to learn and practice on this. But as a beginner, right, so what I would suggest is many people ask me how exactly we can get into the DevOps world itself. Okay, so I ask people to go through Azure DevOps. The reason being is if there are 100 requirements in the AWS, right? In AWS, we'll get thousands of resumes. Okay, if there is a Azure DevOps opening is there, if 100 openings are there, we hardly get some around 10 to 20. Okay, there are demand and supply wise. There are lots of opportunity. Demand is more, supply is very less in case of Azure. In DevOps world, basically, we can either follow some kind of a process, either agile process or a scrum process or a Kanban. If you are planning to use any of this process in order to make your development cycle a bit easier, right? So we go for the number one solution or software available is a Jira. Okay, it's a ticketing tool where you create a stories. DevOps engineers will work on it and close after your sprint end, right? Your work will be closed as a story itself. So in order to maintain this ticketing system in Azure world, we have Azure Boards. Apart from Azure Board, we have Azure Repo. Okay, in order to store all our code and repositories, we use Azure Repos. In order to whatever the application we try to build it, right, it has to be built and then it has to be deployed across deployed to a different environment, dev, test and production environment, and it has to be tested as well, right? And once it is tested, it has to be pushed to the production. Okay, so if you are pushing it to production, is nothing but it has to be accessible by the customers, right? Customers should be able to use that particular product or application, right? Azure pipeline we use in order to do all the CI and CD part of it, meaning build it, deploy to the one by one higher environment and test it out our application during the course of software development lifecycle. Once we build it, it has to be tested, obviously, right? Whatever the feature it has been developed, right? So those are the features. Is it working fine or not? Those are the things you will need to test it out. For that purpose, either you can do a manual testing, automation testing. So those all the testing can be achieved by using Azure Test Plan. The next one is Azure Artifacts. So in Azure Artifacts, part of your application, you will build the application, right? Those application has to be kept it in some secured place. Okay, so in Azure we have a Azure Artifact. So we build it. Once we build it, we will package it out. Okay, that package bit it has to be kept it in a centralized location. So Azure Artifacts comes into the picture. So what we do is we pick up those artifacts, we publish it to Azure Artifact, and we pick it for the next stage. We pick it from the Azure Artifact and then we go and either deploy it or modify it. And evolution of Azure DevOps. So first Microsoft started with a software called as a VSTS, okay, Visual Studio Team System. So it was a suite of a softwares for which was used for a development team in order to do building up of a application. Okay, so it was done in 2005. Okay, so in 2010, Microsoft introduced a team foundation server, project management, collaboration features were there, and even the source control. Then in 2013, it released the next version of it, TFS 2013, which had a new features, web-based access as well as a Git support. Okay, before this we had a centralized version control system. Okay, in 2010, but in 2013 they introduced the Git bit. The difference between Git and a distributed and centralized repository, I will try to explain it in another couple of minutes. In 2015, Microsoft started with a VSTS, which was a cloud version of this TFS. With that bit, we were able to, using the cloud-based as a service, we were able to test it out. Around in 2017, new features, new interface, they changed our features as well as interface, whatever we currently see it, right, done during that time itself. Post that, around 2018, so during this time itself, whatever we call it as Azure DevOps, right? So that VSTS was renamed as a Azure DevOps. Okay. So during this same period, 2018, Microsoft acquired GitHub. And then during the 2018 itself, they started integrating Azure DevOps with GitHub. Sometimes we call Azure as ASDO as well. So ASDO stands for, AZ stands for Azure. From DevOps, we pick a D, and from ops we pick O. So sometimes we call it as a ASDO as well. Okay, if people say have you worked on ASDO, right? So it is nothing but a Azure DevOps itself. Okay, so in 2019, so Azure DevOps server was released. There are two types of offerings are there available. One is Azure DevOps server in order to automate on-premises deployment. Okay, so obviously as of now there are plenty of applications still running on the data centers. Okay, in order to do the build and deployment of that one, Microsoft announced this, but Azure DevOps Server. So in 2019, Azure DevOps started integration with the Kubernetes service, right? So as you know, in around 2018 itself, Kubernetes picked up a bit of a more of a momentum. Okay. Thanks to Docker and all those stuff. Because of that, around that period itself, each of this cloud service providers started providing their own managed solutions of Kubernetes. Okay, AKS is a managed service of Kubernetes itself in Azure world. So similarly, AWS has its own EKS, GCP has GKE, and OCA has a OKE. So around 2019, Azure DevOps introduced, they have enhanced their own security bit. 2020, they started integrating with third-party tools like Jenkins, the Ansible. Azure Boards, which helps us plan as well as track, complete our day-to-day development cycle, right? So whatever the work it has been given, since we are following some kind of a agile process or a scrum process or any Kanban services, right, processes, right? So we will be having a 2-week sprint cycle. At the starting of a sprint, we get a work. So we work during those 2 weeks, we try to work on those tickets. Okay, and then at the end of a sprint, we find it out or evaluate, saying that how much we are able to do it. We'll find out a velocity, saying that how much work was given and how much we did it, right? So in order to quantify the work was given to us, so how exactly we have done that, in order to track it and manage it, so we use either or if your project can afford it, they go for a Jira. So Jira is a Atlassian product. Okay, it costs first 10 users they give it for free, but after that, post that, it is quite expensive. Okay, only the big companies can afford it. So whereas in the Azure DevOps itself, in order to start with the requirement gathering to release to the production, so all this cycle can be achieved using Azure DevOps itself. As a DevOps engineer, you will be given a task saying that this task has to be completed. So on a day-to-day basis, as a DevOps engineer, it's your responsibility to work on that particular ticket and update on a daily basis. So if you think if the ticket has been completed, right, you go and pick up another ticket which has been assigned to you. So in that manner, you track it. So on a day-to-day basis, we will be having a stand-up. So that is the start of your day. So during the stand-up, your Scrum Master will go through your Azure board and ask a question. Do you have any issues with your, so if you have any issues with your ticket, so if you don't have any issues, daily basis, you need to update it. If there are impediments, you will mention it out. But your Scrum Master will refer Azure board as a single source of truth. Okay, any updation, your ticket or your as a whole as your project, right, it is visible in the Azure board itself. Any stakeholder wants to see your project's update, they can go to the Azure boards and they can have a single picture of our current progress. of our project. There are these many parts are there. So work item, it's basically if you click on that, you will be able to see what all the tickets is assigned to you in a board's complete team's board it is. So if your sprint team has a 5 to 8 developers or DevOps engineers, all those tasks you can at a single place you can see it. What other your team member has currently doing it, that also you can view it in this particular boards. Backlog is a place where usually what we do is we do a PI planning, that is 2 quarters work. We try to capture it and keep it in a backlog. Think that you have completed your work. Okay, so if you don't have any other work, so then what you do is you need to go back to the you can check with your Scrum Master as well as your team lead. What they do is they will check it out in the backlog, how many issues are there for the next 2 quarters, what all the things it has to be done, right? Pick up any stories which is present in the backlog. A backlog is a kind of a basket where all the work which is supposed to be done for the next 2 quarters, meaning next 6 months, right? All those things we will keep it in create a ticket and keep it in a backlog. Sprint is usually currently the standard is 2 weeks sprint. Okay, in some cases it totally depends on your project. So if a project says let us follow 3 weeks sprint, you can follow it. Again, it's agile, meaning how much flexible you wanted to do it. Company as your project has matured enough, right? You can use those many weeks of a sprints. These are all the glimpse of the each of the specific type of processes. Okay, I won't try to go into the in detail of it. So if required, probably in the next bit of a cycle, we will go for agile process and in depth of this bit. Okay, as of now, we'll concentrate on only on the Azure DevOps bit. So now coming back to the Azure Repos. Azure Repo is the main important component in DevOps cycle. Okay, so we follow infra as a code, meaning all the code or whatever the code it has been changed, right? Whether infrastructure provisioning, configuration management, whatever it is that task you are trying to do, right? Everything we try to keep it in a Azure Repo. So Azure Repo is nothing but it is an extension of, it's a version control system. So what is version control system is take a snapshot for each time whenever you make a change, okay? Whether it can be a small change or a bigger change. So what you do is whatever changes you are for auditing purposes, or you wanted to go in back in time, meaning say 1 week back, what was the code you wanted to deploy the same infrastructure. You can do that using infrastructure as a code. Using Azure Repo, you develop all your scripts, either Terraform script, Ansible script, or ARM template, whatever. All the things you try to keep it repo. Note that Azure Repo supports 2 types of version control system. One is Git, distributed version control system. Second one is a TFVC, Team Foundation version control system. This is basically a centralized one. So you may ask, what is centralized version control system? In one of the data center or in a cloud, it has been installed. Think that we are 3-member team. We are building a Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so if we are building a Kubernetes cluster, so we are using Terraform. Okay, so if we are using a Terraform, so we have 3 DevOps engineers. So all 3 has to work on the that piece of a Terraform code. Okay, what we usually do is we go and create a one repo called as a say infra-EKS cluster. Okay, as a repo name. And then each one of us has given a one task. Probably one guy has given a VNet related work, and another guy has been given a EKS cluster build-up work, and another guy, the third guy, given a deployment of a workloads into the Kubernetes cluster, how exactly it has to be done. So here, think that all the code, it has been kept it in on this central repository. Think that this person, due to some reason, okay, this server goes down. Okay, there is an internet issue is there, or the data center got corrupted, or whatever it is the case. Okay, so some DNS issue, whatever it is, right? So this server goes down. In that case, what will happen is all these 3 people won't be able to work on that particular project itself. They cannot continue their work, because in order to check it out, other person what they have committed the code, in order to get the latest copy, they have to go through via this server itself. Okay, they cannot independently work on this particular repo. That is the drawback of our centralized version control system, meaning a single point of failure. Okay, because of this, all the developers or DevOps engineers are standstill, so they can't work on it. Okay, that is one of the drawbacks of it. Okay, there are many are there. For example, the working with the branches, it's a bit difficult in the centralized version control system. Okay, whereas coming back to the distributed version control system, this example distributed version control system example is Git. Okay, by the way, another one fact. Okay, the Git was developed by the father of the Linux. Okay, that is really a Linus Torvalds. So Linus Torvalds, who is the father of Linux, right? He developed Git as well because he was fed up with the centralized version system. To take a few names, CVS and a Subversion. These are all the centralized version control system. He was fed up with that, so that is the reason he developed his own distributed version control system. In this case, so as you could see, our Git server is deployed on a central place. So on your laptop, this is your laptop. Okay, so what in a distributed version control system, what it does is when you first download or clone a repository from central server to a distributed central server to your laptop, right? This box is nothing but your laptop. It copies a local copy of your repository. Okay, so what is the advantage of that one is if this goes down due to whatever the reason, right? So this person is not impacted. He would be able to make his code changes, commit to this repository and keep on working on it. Once he is back, he will do a push to the central repository. Other person can pick it up. Similarly, other person also, there's no dependency on whether this code is committed or not. They can independently work on it. Okay, because the repo is cloned on their individual laptop. Due to some cases, unless your laptop get crashed, then only you will be losing your code. Other than that one, local repo will be, there won't be any impact. That was the advantage of our distributed version control system. In Azure Repo, so it supports both the bit. Okay, so I'll show it how exactly the Azure DevOps looks like. 99% of the application, okay, it will be using Git itself. Okay, unless your project has been developed say 10 years back. Okay, any new project which runs on it, right? Any new repo which has been created, right? It will be created on a Git itself. Okay, we won't be using a centralized version control system. Reason being, it's no one uses it. Okay, by default 99% of the time people use Git itself. Git is an open source, it is free. Okay, on top of that one, people have built their own extension. For example, these are all the main Git extensions. Okay, Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, GitHub and GitLab. Okay, if you know Git, all these are extension of Git itself. Okay, if you know Git, 80% of the time you know all these rest of the softwares. Okay, so Azure Repo is Microsoft one, it's free. Okay, GitHub, it is kind of 10 people, it is free, and few resources, few repositories you can create it. Okay, for a company based basically. Okay, so GitLab, there also free version is there. Even Bitbucket also has a free version. But these GitLab, Bitbucket and Bitbucket is developed by Atlassian, whose other products are Jira and Confluence. These are all famous products. Okay, so GitHub is again owned by Microsoft, but out of the box, Azure DevOps supports Azure Repo and GitHub. There is integration is very good. If you're working on any client, right? Client doesn't have a good budget and all. So if they have a budget, they will go for a Bitbucket or GitHub or GitLab. Take a enterprise license. In that way, these three companies make a money. Whereas Azure Repo, it's kind of a free version. Coming back to Azure Pipeline, obviously as a DevOps engineer or as a project, you build it. Building is basically, if you have hundreds of files on your laptop, right, you need to compress it out. So obviously what you will do, you will create a zip out of it so that it is only one file. Inside that one, it is all the 100 files are in a compressed format. Build is nothing but similar bit. Okay, so what, for example, in Java bit, if you're working on a Java application, what we do is we build as part of a build process. What we do is we compile the code and create a jar. The outcome is a jar or var or ER file. Okay, so these are all basically, you can think of it as a zipped version of that respective softwares. Any application, if it has to be deployed to the production, right? So it has to be built first. Using Azure pipeline, first what we do is build it, deploy to the dev environment. We do the testing. And then once it has been tested in the dev environment, we move back to the higher environment called as a test environment. We test it out over there again, and then release it to the, deploy it to the production. Production is nothing but it is the end customer is accessing that kind of application. Using Azure Pipelines, what we do is we can use a continuous integration and continuous delivery. Delivery is nothing but move it from dev to the higher environment. Continuous integration is basically, it's a practice. You need to fix the issues in the lower environment itself rather than in production environment. During the development lifecycle itself, you test it out. You never know, right? The developer has copied the code from a chat GPT or over the internet. If it has a bug and all, right? So if it is not meeting the standards, so you need to test your code quality as well. So those are the things you try to do it in the development cycle itself. That is in this as part of a continuous integration itself. So in the lower environment itself, you fix it, automate it, you test it out on a daily basis. You do a testing of your application. So that process is called as a continuous integration. Continuous delivery, once it has been tested in the dev environment, it has to be moved to the higher environment with the approval. Obviously, you will raise a ticket in order to go and deploy to the higher environment. So during that time, we use a continuous delivery. So each phases of deployment, there should be an approval process. A person will go and give a approval in order to do a deployment. We call it as a approval gates. So those are the things we can achieve it using Azure pipeline itself. Test plans in Azure test plan. So obviously the application what we have built, right? So it has to be tested, right? So either manual testing, the feature whatever we have been added, right? It has to be tested. So we can do a manual testing or automated testing or UAT testing or a little bit of a load test, this, that, and all, right? In that case, we go for a Azure test plan itself, which is Azure has this all inbuilt solutions in order to cover all your software development cycle. So using this Azure test plan, you can configure it, you can do those testing, and all the reports can be visible within the Azure DevOps itself. In order to use Azure test plan, we should have this plan. So in a stakeholder plan, only we can do this, but okay, other than that one, you can't do test planning, all this, but okay, you need to purchase this kind of a add-on it is. Azure DevOps comes up with a bunch of free services, but in order to use the test plan and all those bit, so you need to go for this subscription. Okay, then only you will be able to use Azure test plan. So next bit is Azure Artifacts. Azure Artifacts. So obviously, if you see, we build our application as a jar file or some kind of artifact we created in order to do a build and deployment. Either it can be a Helm charts or Helm files or jar files or any output out of the build process or which is required for a higher environment. Okay, think that you are doing some data science projects. Whatever the input it has been done in the lower environment, it has to be passed on to the higher environment, whichever the files it might be. So in those cases, we use Azure Artifacts. Azure Artifacts supports multiple types of package managers. Okay, NuGet is basically used for the Microsoft .NET kind of application. NPM, Python, Maven, universal packages. These are all the things it is used for our, these are all called as a package managers, which is used in order to do a build and deployment of your application. So only one caveat is that using Azure, if you are going for a free version, but to 2 GB of storage, you can keep it. Okay. After post that, you need to pay for it. Okay. What is the benefits of Azure DevOps? So in Azure DevOps, compared to our Jenkins, if I take an example of Jenkins, right? So Jenkins, if you could see, it doesn't have its own Git repositories, or it doesn't have its own artifactory, okay, artifacts in order to store it. Azure DevOps gets to our table is complete software development lifecycle. Board is a competitor to Jira. If you wanted to run any testing tool, right, either JMeter or a Postman, BDD tools, right? So if you wanted to use that, you need to configure it again. All the functionality in order to do a build and deployment, everything it is in under the one roof. So it has an integration with many development tools, Visual Studio, Eclipse, or IntelliJ or Xcode, where you go and code it. Whereas Jenkins, it is a bit difficult to do that. Again, it's a cloud-based scalability. So if you have your own Jenkins installation, right? So if you wanted to upgrade it, so either it is install, you need to have a separate agents, you need to freeze your pods, right? The agent pods. If you have installed on a virtual machine, the agent has to be increased. Okay. On the fly, you won't be able to do it on the Jenkins. Someone has to go and tweak it. Okay. Whereas cloud-based Azure DevOps, it's a cloud-based platform. If you need more agents, you go and click on one tick, and it will be up and running. Okay. By default, they gave you a free but one agent free, okay, and for 1800 minutes per month free, okay. But if you want more than that, you need to pay for it. Agile project management using our Azure boards as well as Wiki. Okay, Wiki is nothing but a competitor to Confluence, so it doesn't have a full capability or feature of Confluence. In order to do documentation and all those stuffs, you can use Wiki. Okay, so coming back to continuous integration and delivery, as I explained, whereas its immediate competitor is Jenkins. So Jenkins doesn't have all the features. It doesn't have artifact. It doesn't have its Git repository. So all those things, it is not there. Whereas Azure DevOps inbuilt gateways, Git is there. So you need not look for GitHub or Bitbucket or something like that. Some other tool, right? Or GitLab. So it has a rich ecosystem. You have so many tasks or extension it has been built in. You can easily do a build and deployment using already present market tools task, which is available for free. Okay. So overall, Azure DevOps scores a hell lot of points. Okay. That is the reason people are going towards the Azure DevOps. Okay. Coming back to Azure DevOps pricing and plans. So the basic plan it gives, if you could see, 5 users are free. Okay. If you wanted to go for a basic plus test plan, so this is the cost, you need to bear it. Okay. So how long after the first 5 users, how long you increase it, the cost gets increased. Okay. They have, I will send out a link saying that where you can find this bet. It is readily available on the Microsoft site. So if it is a individual services, for example, Azure Pipeline or Artifact, you wanted to say more than one free agent. So if you could see, I have scaled it to 3 bit. Okay. It is asking £30 for per month. Okay. The agents are basically where our workloads build and deployment it happens. Artifact, if it is more than the 2 GB you wanted, so the cost is as per mentioned over here. This is Azure DevOps. Okay. If you click here, overview, but this is at the starting, it will our dashboard, it will show you. Okay. So this is our dashboard for our boards. Okay. This is Wiki. It is basically creation of a documentation. Okay. So here you could see our boards, backlogs, sprints. So currently it is an empty one. For this specific session bit itself, I have created a blank project. It doesn't have anything. Okay. So if you see the boards, so all these links we have it. Okay. So apart from that, we have a Azure Repo itself. So if you could see, we can go and create our own repository here. Okay. It's a Git repository. So if you wanted to create any new repository, you can click over here. Okay. So here you will get a option. Okay. Either you wanted to go for a distributed or a centralized one. Coming back to the pipelines, so you could see we have these many options. Pipelines, environment, you can create it, test, dev, and dev, test, production, and all. Releases, this is a old type of a deployment, which is Microsoft is not developing a feature for that. Okay. Libraries, a few of the libraries variables you can group it over here. Test plans. So if you could see here, this is what our test plan looks here. This is a vanilla system. It doesn't have anything. Okay. As of now, if you click on artifacts, so currently I have not connected any feed. Okay, so that's the reason it is empty. It is free to create.